Welcome to Generations, a show which helps people 50 and better lead happy, healthy, and productive lives. Here's today's moderator, Jeffrey DeZellar.
Hello, and welcome to Generations. My name is Jeff DeZellar, and I'll be your moderator for today's show. Joining me today are my co-hosts, Nadia Giordana.
Hi, glad to be here today, Jeff.
Happy to see you, Nadia. And the one and only Ed Noreen.
Hello, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, Ed. Good to see you. Author Midge Bubani is with us.
I'm delighted to be here, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Midge. We're glad to have you also. And last but not least is our guest, Randy Smith, who has a 42-year career as an attorney in focusing on consumer law, public interest law primarily. But basically, we're excited to hear what Randy has to say, and perhaps you could give us an introduction, Randy, and tell us briefly about what you've done in your long career.
Well, first, thanks for having me in to talk to you all. This is promises to be fun. Well, let's see. I have what I sort of regard as a checkered career. I've done a lot of things. I started out my practice with Minneapolis Legal Aid Society, worked there for about 10 years as a staff attorney and then a managing attorney. Took a brief sort of sidestep out into private practice, and I was the first director of the Minneapolis Civilian Police Review Authority, the first of many unsuccessful attempts to make that kind of organization work. I went back into legal services for about 5 years, and then for 15 years worked as the managing attorney of the UAW Legal Services Plan, which is a prepaid legal services plan representing auto workers and retirees and their dependents. Didn't represent the union, just represented the individual union members. And then about 10 years ago, I struck out on my own. I've been in a solo practice since then, focusing mostly on bankruptcy and consumer law. So that's kind of what I've been up to.
Very interesting. So of your areas of specialty or expertise, which would you say come up most often for senior people, say above 55 years old?
Oh boy, that's a good one. Well, unfortunately, bankruptcies are not uncommon among seniors. I would probably say among the areas of practice that I'm in, that's probably the one that affects seniors most. Most of the other areas of consumer law really have to do with people who are more active in the marketplace than seniors are, and are getting, stung by various nefarious practices, or at least so I think of them as.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the things that seniors can do to prevent, having to go into foreclosure and bankruptcy and those kinds of things?
It's kind of hard. Obviously, saving money for retirement and putting money aside as your life progresses, that's probably the main way of avoiding that. But I have to say that there are so many unexpected events that drive people into bankruptcy. Loss of income, people lose jobs, they get divorced, the spouse loses a job, they go through periods of heavy medical bills. All of those things are pretty common drivers for bankruptcy, and it's pretty hard to avoid those. You can't will yourself into avoiding medical problems. There are people who are in bankruptcy just because they haven't managed their money very well. But I guess I find that's a pretty small percentage. I would put it at maybe 10 or 20%, and I would say most of the other ones are circumstances I think people might find hard to avoid.
Are seniors going into bankruptcy, would you say, I've been hearing more recently of some people going through bankruptcy multiple times. Is that a very common thing? Are these seniors that are approaching bankruptcy at this point in their lives, does it seem common that they've ever done it before?
Well, it's not uncommon for people to have done bankruptcy several times. I suppose maybe a third of my cases involve, maybe less, involve people in that kind of circumstance. You know, the problem with a bankruptcy is it gives you a quote-unquote fresh start. But as I always tell my clients, look, there are things I can do for you, but I can't manufacture money. And when you get out of a bankruptcy with the sort of minimal grub stake that you're allowed to keep as you go through a bankruptcy, for a lot of people, that's not enough to give them a leg up on their financial life. And so they continue, they've wiped out their debts, but they don't have very much property, and they may have gone into bankruptcy with financial problems, which the bankruptcy didn't eliminate. And so they just struggle along for a few more years and find they haven't been able to keep up and have to do it again.
And if you're 50 or 60 or whatever, getting a job would be hard. I mean, rebuilding is difficult, I would think, for a lot of people.
Oh, I think that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And that may be true more for seniors than for younger people. That, you know, the opportunity to kind of kickstart a new career gets more difficult as you get older.
Definitely.
I've had friends who have used a reverse mortgage to get money and and then be able to stay in their house. What is your view on what could be the pitfalls in that?
Well, my main reaction to reverse mortgages, well, it's twofold. One is there is a place for them, I think. If you're not too concerned with leaving your house as a legacy, as part of your estate, you'd like to stay in your house, and you'd like to convert that equity in the house into a stream of income, it can work that way. But the other reaction I have is that I'm really cautious about, in fact, I don't recommend that people do reverse mortgages. If they talk to me about it, my reaction is look at it very, very carefully. Because there are a lot of really bad, as they say in the financial industry, products out there. You know, there are a lot of reverse mortgages that have hooks in them that surprise people, and they wind up, you know, having squandered their home equity and losing their home and being out on the street.
Bad products and bad salesmen.
Yep,
And
exactly.
gullible customers.
Yep, exactly. Well, not so much gullible customers, but people who aren't necessarily sophisticated enough to see through the
Absolutely.
The fast sales talk that they're getting.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I'd be cautious. I advise people to be cautious about them. And as I was saying when we were talking about this subject earlier, if you don't feel that you know enough to be a financial advisor yourself, and you're thinking about taking out a reverse mortgage, go find a financial advisor.
Yeah.
Or as Warren Buffett says, if you feel like you don't understand it, you don't understand it.
Well, what about, you do work with automobiles and the lemon laws?
I
Can
do
you shed some light on that?
Well, I do some of those cases, yeah. Lemon laws, well, there's one misconception about lemon laws. For one thing, in Minnesota, the lemon law only applies to new car sales. So there are a lot of people who feel that they've bought a car, you know, it's not performing the way they wanted it to. Oh, it's a lemon. Well, yeah, it's a lemon, but it's not under the lemon law. Minnesota does have some nice laws that require warranties for newer vintage cars. But if you're getting a really old car and you're buying it as is, there may not be any statutory protections in Minnesota. And then you wind up dealing with trying to prove actual fraud, which is very difficult.
That'd be really hard.
Yeah, yeah. And even if you're using the lemon law, it's fairly technical. That is, there are a certain number of steps that you need to go through. You need to turn it in for repairs a certain number of times and have the repair fail. And only after it's failed a number of times do you get to say, okay, that problem with the car enables me to use the lemon law in my favor and to demand that they either pay me back for the car or replace it. So, but there are a number of other situations that have to do with vehicles where you don't need to look to the lemon law. A repair that's consciously shoddy, that is where the repair shop tells you that they're performing according to one standard and then they're doing the work according to another standard, may just give you a breach of contract claim.
Randy, how much, excuse me, how much does it cost to file bankruptcy? I'm just taking notes in case I need to do that in the future.
Well, why don't you and I talk afterwards?
All right, cut me a deal.
Okay, yeah. It varies a lot. There are, and it depends on the kind of bankruptcy that you're doing. There's a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which is the kind of bankruptcy most people think of. It's sort of an in-and-out bankruptcy. You provide your financial information to the court. The court says, yes, you qualify for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. 3 months later, you've got a bankruptcy discharge. Pretty straightforward. There's also a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, which is basically a court-ordered repayment plan. And so what you do with a Chapter 13 bankruptcy is you pay your quote-unquote disposable income to the bankruptcy trustee who manages the case for the court. You do that for a 3 to 5 year period, and then at the end of that, you get your discharge. So those are more expensive. They last longer. Putting together a Chapter 13 plan is more complicated than doing a Chapter 7. So the fees can run anywhere from $1,000 for somebody I wouldn't recommend that you hire, to I've heard of what we call the tall building law firms charging as much as $20,000 for a Chapter 7, and I wouldn't recommend you hire them either because at that level you're getting ripped off. So it varies a lot. It tends to fall for a Chapter 7. It tends to fall, I would say, in the $1,500 to $2,000 range, unless it's a really complicated one, and they can be complicated.
You know, I filed a Chapter 15. I think it was 15, and I paid 50% of. I mainly was credit card debt. So I paid 50 cents on a dollar that I owed, and I'm 3 to 5 years.
Right.
What also surprised me about it was how quickly I got credit back. I mean, I had offers from credit card companies just like this. Let us loan you some money. Okay, good.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, that's a question I get from people a lot. I don't see that happening quite as much as it used to. 20 years ago, I would, I swear those, in fact, 20 years ago, the credit card industry seemed to think, well, gee whiz, you can't do another bankruptcy for a number of years, so you're a really good credit risk for us. And my clients would get, 3, 4 offers in the few months following the bankruptcy. I don't see that happening nearly as much now as it used to. But I don't think that bankruptcy does as much damage to people's credit as they think. I know another bankruptcy lawyer who I think highly of, who sort of refers to it as a reset on your credit score. And she says it's a reset to 650. I think it's more complicated and individualized than that. But clearly, there is a reset. It doesn't trash your credit. chances are pretty good your credit was already trashed if you're going into a bankruptcy. Or it will be because you've just visited a bankruptcy lawyer and you can't make your minimum payments anymore. And so for the most part, it probably holds your credit even or even improves it.
So Randy, let's say someone files for bankruptcy and it's successful legally. How soon would they be able to make major purchases after that, assuming they repaired their credit and so forth? For example, a house. When would they be able to buy a house?
Well, you're basically locked out of the real estate market in terms of getting a mortgage for about a year after filing a bankruptcy. And there are a number of significant restrictions for another year after that. So for 2 years, it's kind of difficult. After that, it matters more what you've done to repair your credit. After that, the bankruptcy starts to really fade away as a major component of your credit score, and what you've been doing with your credit really starts to become much more important.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah, it is. There's actually a bankruptcy lawyer I know who likes to joke that she put one of her secretaries through a bankruptcy, and 2 years later, her secretary bought a better house than the lawyer had.
I thought you were going to say bought the firm, but so in 2008, as everyone knows, we had a severe dislocation in the economy, the housing crash, followed by the stock market crash, and arguably the current stock market is really frothy, as they say, at really high levels, maybe higher than valuations would warrant. Housing, I haven't heard so much about that, but it's also gone up a lot in the last 10 years. It seems inevitable, in fact it is inevitable, I believe, that there's going to be another major correction or bear market or something possibly affecting housing. When that happens, what sort of changes would you expect in the phone calls you get at the office and the people that want to see you?
I think the major change is I'll get more phone calls. I'm not sure that they're going to be that much different.
Okay.
I'm just trying to think about the kind of cases I got in 2008 when the economy tanked. And I'm not sure there's nothing that stands out for me.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure they're all that different.
Not a big difference.
It's
very interesting.
No, it's just, there's more misery to go around, and so
Right.
there are more bankruptcies to be done.
Right. Very interesting. With that, it's probably a good time for us to shift gears a little bit on the show. Our producer has given us a couple of questions to kick around related to the law, and maybe throw the first one out and just have a hearty, rousing group discussion here. Why is it that human societies need to have laws? Just basic question. Why do we have laws? Why do we need them? Any thoughts on that?
I tend to be kind of a rules and regulations kind of person. It just seems natural to have laws. There'd be anarchy. There's always going to be the person who would take advantage of the other people. And I'm probably one of those people they'd be taking advantage of. So I like laws. Simple as that.
We started as a tribal society, and then we grew into cities and then into nations, and that took a long period of time. And when you have diverse populations and you're dealing with other nations, you have to have laws. You have to have set some standard, and they will vary and change. You have to have boundaries.
It would be nice if we didn't have to.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have family that, one family member I can think of particularly, who will never see this show, doesn't like rules or regulations or laws of any kind. And I think there are a lot of people out there like that. Said, why do we have to have laws? So there's a whole school of thought out there saying that we can self-manage ourselves. But
Well, some of us like breaking laws. I think I'll go a little faster in the
You
car.
are.
I got to get to work.
Well, I think a lot of them are for the common good or the common safety. A lot of our laws relate to that, but they're also to protect people from the vulnerable and people from taking advantage of other people and harming others in financial ways.
Well,
as,
and
as
that rolls into enforcing those laws too. We have to choose people to enforce the laws. If we have laws and make laws, we can't have just everybody enforcing them either, so it becomes very complex as we go along.
And
If we didn't have laws, we wouldn't have Randy. We
That's
wouldn't
right.
have lawyers.
Right, that's the
right.
reason.
We need lawyers.
We have laws because we need lawyers.
Yes.
I have to interject a quick thing, Randy. A little bird in this studio told me to ask you if you recall a nickname, Guido.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that was.
How did that come about?
Oh, well, I was in, junior high Spanish? And there's not a really great Spanish equivalent for Randall.
So naturally it would be Guido.
And, well, there was Randolfo, but that became Randolfo, and it became other things that were, it sounded even worse. So the teacher came up with Guido, just to give me another name.
I'm sorry, that had nothing to do with laws.
Yeah, well, that's the history there.
Well, maybe we should take a whack at the other question. The other question was, why do similar societies, for example, the United States and Western Europe, have similar demographics, pretty much similar wealth, et cetera, and yet in a lot of cases have completely different laws for their countries, even though you would think, well, the people are kind of similar. Why does that come about?
Why would they not come up with the same laws as we have?
or similar anyway.
Yeah.
Well, for one thing, there are a couple major traditions. There's the common law tradition, which comes out of England and migrated to the United States, where judge-made law and precedent is really important. And then you've got a tradition that comes out of basically the Latin countries, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's more based on the rules that are written down and are the way that those rules are interpreted winds up not getting codified, or it doesn't get referred back to. So you keep going back to the same rules. You keep going back to its, and I can't remember the name of the tradition, but it's.
We get the idea.
Yeah, yeah. So that's one thing. Louisiana actually has, it comes out of that tradition. It's the one state in the Union that doesn't follow the common law tradition. They follow this other tradition.
Oh, okay.
They were French.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, we're a democracy, supposedly. Well, when you have fascism or you have communism or dictatorships, a strong individual who pretty much runs everything, it changes the laws and the freedoms that people have and the interpretations.
Right. Laws become less important and the whims of the dictator become much more important.
Well, and our country is very diversified in the regions and the needs, like I'm thinking the old Wild West may have had some bearing on some of these differences in laws and, like with gun control, for example,
Right.
everybody wanted a 6-shooter on their side because it was dangerous back then, and it's hard to change laws once they're in effect. I mean, there's some really old laws on the books that are very archaic, aren't there?
Yep. I don't wind up dealing with them that often,
Yeah,
but they're there.
They're there.
But I think that's a great point, Midge, that it's the tradition, because I think gun control is a perfect example where obviously in America we've got an epidemic of gun violence, whereas in other countries, European countries, Japan, Australia, they have far, far less of that. And you could go into government-provided health care for all, or you could go to reproductive rights for women, or a wide variety of other issues where, without labeling these things so much, but you have a much more conservative posture in the United States than you do in Western Europe for a lot of these, and arguably a lot of what they're doing makes social and economic sense, and maybe it's our traditions that have kind of prevented the migration to that way of jurisprudence or
Yeah.
a legal framework.
There's another interesting example that occurred to me, which is, it's a concept that it's not all that familiar in the States. It's a concept of group libel. You know, in the United States, we've got a very, very strong free speech tradition, probably the strongest in the developed world in terms of legal protections. But Europe went through the Second World War and went through the experience of Nazism and the Holocaust, the attempt to wipe out Jews. And so in a number of countries, France, for example, Germany, here you can't say anything, here you can say anything basically trashing a particular group. In France and Germany, it can actually be illegal to use public comments trashing, say, Jews or immigrants or you know, some particular underrepresented group.
Right.
Can actually be illegal, whereas here, that's a concept that we find very difficult to understand.
Right, because America, the soldiers were over there fighting, but we were removed to a certain extent by
Right.
the ocean
Yeah.
from that, you know, a day to day for 5 years of World War II or
Right.
6 years.
Right, we weren't right in the middle of the
Right.
damage that can get caused by those group libels.
That makes
For
sense.
Well,
historical events, the pendulum swings. The 60s here was very liberal. We have become very conservative, and hopefully we'll move back into the middle.
On that note, we're out of time, and I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and we'll see you all next time for Generations.